On this Erasing Shame podcast, I'm having an unhurried, unscripted conversation with Pastor Daniel M., who is the senior pastor, lead pastor of Beulah Alliance Church up in Alberta, Canada.
That's right.
Edmonton, to be specific.
Yeah.
And he's been the post for about a year and a half, since May of 2021. Congratulations on your new post. And you've had an amazing ministry journey since I first met you in 2008 at a Mosaic Church conference in Pasadena. And you've had a number of posts. You've gone into podcasting. You've written a couple books. And my first question to you is, well, congratulations. And then secondly, how do you do it all?
Well, DJ, it's so great to be with you. And I still remember that exactly when we met. I was Skyping my family from outside. And I remember you stopped and you're like, what are you doing? And then we had a great conversation and have stayed in touch all the way through. That's an interesting question, right? Because there's what I do on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, seasonal basis, what that everyday life looks like, and then what the perception of that looks like from the outside.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So as you know, there's a lot of different ways to work, batch working, different, and when you do things, especially in publishing, it takes a year for the book to come out. And there's a lot of those pieces. So I don't know where you want to start, but I only have 24 hours in a day. I get 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night and have a wife and kids. So there's a lot of different ways that we can answer that question.
Well, this is an unhurried conversation, so we'll explore a bit of what a day in the life of Daniel M. looks like. Do you still podcast with your wife on the marriage?
Yeah, we do. From when we started out, we did it weekly, and I was living in Nashville at the time. And since moving back to Canada and now going into this role, and Christina is doing her master's of counseling psychology at the same time, as well as homeschooling our kids, we didn't feel like God was calling us to stop the podcast permanently. So what we've done since coming back is we've taken longer breaks in the summer and over Christmas season. And now we're releasing 2 episodes a month. And a lot of that is batch recording. We do a lot of that at a single time. So it's not necessarily a week in, week out sort of thing. So we do still podcast, but that's the only podcast that I'm currently doing at the moment. I've hopped off of a few of the other ones that I used to do.
All right, very good. Because you were part of New Church's podcast, which was part of Lifeway.
Yes,
I know they've had a couple musical chairs since.
Yeah, that's right.
Since then, but it's still going, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's right.
And go ahead and mention a couple books you've written. I think you might be working on a third one.
Yeah. So the first one that I wrote was Planting Missional Churches with Ed Stetzer, and the second one was No Silver Bullets: 5 Small Shifts to Transform Your Church. So that one's about discipleship and how to create a discipleship pathway in your church. The third one is on You Are What You Do and 6 Other Lies About Work, Life, and Love. So that's a book about work, about identity. It really is. It's one of those books, core identity, helping Christians understand their identity in Christ. But I wrote it in a way where you could easily hand it to a friend who's seeking or who's interested in Christ, and it would work for them in that context as a evangelism or pre-evangelism sort of book. So that was the intent of that. And then I'm working on my 4th one. Those were all with B&H Publishing. And I'm working on my 4th one right now with Nav Press. So that's a discipleship, No Silver Bullets 2.0 sort of book. Post-pandemic, new world, in light of the new world that we are in, what are the shifts in discipleship that we need to address as we pastor and as we lead churches? So
yes. Yeah. Well, you mentioned you have 24 hours a day, like all of us, and it sounds like you have a normal sleep schedule.
Yeah.
And you're doing more than the average person. So I'm guessing you've learned how to be very disciplined, very efficient, and you just have more energy than the average Joe to keep putting out, because productivity is a draining kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah,
And
for
so
sure.
let's talk about the restorative part. Like, what are some of the routines that you do to pace yourself so that
Yeah,
you're not? I mean, we're not made. Our brains are not made to work so hard in this
yeah,
knowledge age. Our brains, our body is made with all these other muscles, and our brain is actually designed to be fuel efficient and to
yeah,
find ways to be lazy. And that's the way it's designed. And so for us to be burning our cognitive capacity 8 hours a day or more is actually not the most healthy thing to do. And so, with your role as a senior pastor of a large church, and we'll talk about the church part uh, afterward, but I want to talk first about, well, what are some things that you do to manage the pace so that you're not burning your brain out?
yeah, definitely. So we can start there, and then I
Yeah.
can give your listeners a sense of what my typical schedule is on a week,
Hmm.
because I've put some structure around that and
Mm,
boundaries around
hmm.
that too, and in terms of requests and all that stuff too. So in terms of the restorative side of things, that's a really good point, DJ, especially in the sense that we're not designed to continually output. In fact, if you're always outputting, then you're going to burn out.
Hmm.
So there is that sense. Actually, I remember this is when we met. When we met at that Mosaic conference, Wayne Cordero spoke on, and it was before his Leading on Empty book, the white one.
Hmm.
And I remember still to this day, like that conference was so transformative to me in so many different ways. But I remember his talk because he talked about inputs and outputs from and the analogy of a sink. And
Mm,
there's a way to get water in the faucet, and then there's a drain that goes out. How do you make sure that your inputs are greater than your outputs? If you don't
mm,
have any output and you keep on inputting, you're going to overflow, and that's not healthy. And vice versa, you're going to drain out. So what does that look like? So you're always at a healthy level of input being slightly greater than your outputs. So that's really stuck with me through the years. And as I reflect on what that looks like, the foundation of that is Sabbath. So every
mhm,
Friday for us is our Sabbath. So Sabbath being the
mhm.
day where you do all the things that you get to do and you don't have to do, all the things that
That's
you
good.
want to do and not need to do, and where
Mhm,
you're spending that time with Jesus, with your family, with the things that restore you. So Friday
mhm.
starts with sleeping in because I love it's really the only day of the week that I allow myself to sleep in. So it's
That's
one of
good.
those things where I'll sleep in past 9 o'clock, uh, sometimes even a little bit later if I can. And
Yes.
then after that, Christina and I, we go for a date. And either the date is it's just us two, and we're either going to a restaurant or a coffee shop that we haven't visited yet, trying something new. We like exploring Edmonton in that way, or we're going for a walk in our gorgeous river valley. Edmonton actually, fun note, because I know many of your listeners might not be aware of what Edmonton looks like. We are the
Mhm.
northernmost populous city in North America. We're about
Wow.
3 hours east of the Rocky Mountains. We were
Mhm.
home of the great Wayne Gretzky for many years before he went to the LA Kings and made
Uh-huh.
hockey popular down there. Have about 1.4 million people in our city, 1.3, 1.4 in Greater Edmonton, and we are Canada's largest urban park. We have
Oh.
160 kilometers of maintained pathways, trails, and parks, and we
Mm,
have this gorgeous river valley that is in between this that separates the north and the south of the city all the way through, and it is just
mhm.
it is the most beautiful thing to walk all seasons, even in the winter. So yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll exercise, we'll go for a day, we'll do that, and then the rest of the day we're hanging out with our family, doing fun things. Sometimes we're at home, I'm playing video games with my kids because I love playing video games. Or if we're not doing that, we're playing board games with the family, or going to a restaurant at night with the family. So just or doing a family movie night. So we all different things, but really it's with the
Uh-huh.
family. Don't do any external ministry on Fridays. So that's the thing on a weekly basis that really does restore. I mean, it's biblical, right? But
Yes.
practicing that 24-hour
Yes.
Sabbath has been so restorative to us. Beyond that, on a daily basis, the things that restore my time with Jesus in the mornings. And then in the evenings, Christina and I always do a 20-minute walk before we go to bed in our neighborhood with our dog. So that's that. I mean, because she's going, I'm going, our kids are going. So having
Hmm.
that time together is 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 great. And then the last thing would be, I love how Andy Crouch, he talks about in the TechWise family how he approaches technology, and
Hmm.
how I think he says an hour a day a week a year. So the hour a day for us is over dinner, where it's a zero device area,
Hmm.
and we just eat and enjoy one another and connect. So those are some of the, and then working out. I work out 2 or 3 times a week as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your workout routine?
Yeah, so Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. Christina works out Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I get the off days.
Okay.
We have a Peloton at home, so it's hard for both of us. Like, we really have to coordinate who's going to use it. And the Peloton's both a bike and there's strength workouts and all that stuff. So
Yes.
daily walks, 7 days a week for 20 minutes, and then 2 times a week it's an intense bike workout for one, and then the other one is a strength workout.
Okay. Well, sounds like you're a very scheduled person.
Yes, yeah, I'm very scheduled.
Okay. Well, that keeps your sanity.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
good thing.
I mean, honestly, having that schedule, and you'll hear it when I share what my week looks like
Yes.
for work and in pastoring, creating those boundaries and that predictability with that really does help. Um, yeah, being able to balance and navigate all the different seasons and responsibilities I have.
Okay. So, before we started recording, you mentioned you've had to cut back on your travels. So,
Mhm.
how have you put a parameter around that? Because used to, well, I met you at a conference, so we
Yeah,
used to bump
yeah.
into each other at conferences quite often. And then now, as a lead pastor, what's your travel schedule like? What's your teaching schedule like? And then what's your weekly schedule like?
Yeah, sounds good. So on the travel side of things, I see it as really seasons. So we just entered a new season where Christina started her master's of counseling psychology.
Hmm.
And like I said, she still homeschools our kids. It's something that we started during the pandemic and we've just
Mm-hmm.
continued to do because the kids, it
Mm-hmm.
works for our family.
Yes.
So, giving you a sense, when I worked at Lifeway for 5 years, I was on the road 2 times a month at least. So it was quite a bit of travel. Coming back to local
Mm-hmm.
church ministry, there was that sense of, no, you know what? The church is my primary responsibility. It's our primary calling.
Mm-hmm.
So yet the church hired me knowing that I'm still writing, and they like how I'm writing and how I'm still
Mm-hmm.
podcasting and speaking at different
Mm-hmm.
conferences, and I want to go to conferences and I want to learn from different cohorts. So from that perspective, that was all a part of the package when I came.
Mm-hmm.
From a boundary side of things, I mean, I'm not, I mean, to be gone from the home once a month at this point is too much.
Mm-hmm.
There was a point where I was like, oh no, I could do one trip a month, but that doesn't work for our family at the
Mm-hmm.
moment, partly because I'm also writing this next book. So what
Mm-hmm.
we've done is, in exchange of me writing, I've actually cut down my travel and said no to a lot of opportunities. Even conferences I've wanted to go to, I haven't been able to go
Mm-hmm.
to because you only have a finite amount of time. When I
Right.
hand the manuscript in March of next year, that'll be different, and then we'll revisit again what that looks like, because I won't be doing that Saturday mornings, and it won't be taking up all that mind space anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the boundaries. It's it's season based, right? So it's there's
Yes.
no harsh rule on it.
No, but it's good to get a snapshot of what it looks like now, because
Yeah.
I think what we learn in life and ministry is we don't get to see that very often. We get to
Yeah.
see highlight reels
Yeah, that's right.
and Instagram
Yeah.
snapshots, but to get it in perspective and to get a good look at what looks like for a real person
Hmm.
helps us
Hmm.
to have a point of reference to say, okay, here's an example that we can adapt and learn from and tweak, so that we're not trying to fill in the blank and draw writer's block, which
Well, yeah,
many of us do.
totally. I mean, part of it is if you are faithful in your work and you keep at it for a long time and you just keep on working at your craft and and
Mm,
and are faithful to Jesus first and foremost, but you continue to develop your craft. I mean, it's inevitable as you grow older that there will be an increasing amount of responsibilities, and not even
mhm,
responsibilities, but opportunities. It's not,
mhm,
obviously it's not guaranteed, but if you're faithful at what you're doing and keep on growing and
mhm,
improving in what you do, there'll be opportunities for you to share about that with others. So in that, it's interesting because when an opportunity comes up, especially if it's your first opportunity to do something outside of your context or something, I remember how it was like, oh yeah, like of course I have to say yes, because what if an opportunity doesn't come around again, right? And
mhm,
then you say yes, and then you say yes, and then you say yes, and then you realize that you're not giving your best at what your primary calling is. So then you
mm,
get into that season of how do you discern what to say yes to and what to say no to? And to base that off of honorariums, I know some people do that. I
mhm,
don't necessarily know if that's the best thing to do either. Um, but really going to the feet of Jesus and asking, okay, Jesus, like in light of what you have called me to do and in light of who you are and what you are calling me to do in this season, is this for me? Like, are you calling, is this the opportunity that you want me to do right now, or is this just a good opportunity that I can say no to? So that's that piece where I would just say, as you continue to have opportunities, just, you know, not equating the opportunity with God's will
mm,
would be a good thing to keep in mind, because
mhm.
it's not always the case. Sometimes the enemy
Well,
wants to
spoken
distract you,
with
right?
wisdom beyond your
Yeah.
years, Daniel.
Oh, thank you.
The For us as Asian Americans, it's hard to say no.
Oh yeah. Oh, it hurt.
It's
It's so hard.
embedded,
Yeah.
it's baked into our culture, and then to hear the voice of God instead of hearing the voice of our culture,
Yeah.
really, really hard to do. So it's good to hear someone doing his best to live it out. And then for those who are pastors and those who are ambitious young leaders,
Hmm.
they're wondering how did well, I mean, your example. So how
Hmm.
did you get to where you are being an Asian leader of a predominantly non-Asian church?
Yeah.
Describe the size and the dynamics so people have a little context.
Yeah, for sure. So Beulah Alliance Church is 101 years old
Wow.
and has planted over 30 churches since the beginning. So many great, I mean, we could spend the next few hours talking about all the great historical stories that,
Mhm.
sending evangelism teams out to the countryside via dog sled and horseback,
Oh, wow.
remodeling a Model T Ford, calling it the gospel car, and driving it from little towns to other little towns doing evangelism, and
Mm,
meeting in the movie theater, doing communion over the radio, printing in the newspaper and doing communion over the radio, for everyone on homesteads and on farms, all around.
wow.
So just such a
Uh-huh.
huge legacy around evangelism and church multiplication and mission. So that's what brought me to
Mhm.
Beulah at the first, from 2010 to the end of 2014. I served at
Mhm.
Lifeway as a director of church multiplication, and when I got back, the church was looking for their next lead pastor, and the chief characteristic that they were looking for was someone who would help the church get back to the roots of their roots of multiplication. And I was the
Mhm.
director of church multiplication at Lifeway. Like that was,
Yes.
and it's what I love.
Mm,
So there was such a synergy and a symbiosis there with that. So coming back, yeah, that's a little bit of the
mhm,
flavor and the sense and the call of the church. There really is a call on the city. So our vision is to awaken Greater Edmonton to King Jesus.
mm,
Size
mhm,
wise, I mean, COVID's funny, right? Because everything's
mhm,
a little bit different now. But from a staff perspective, we have about 60 staff.
mm,
On these days, on the weekends, around 3,000 or so, with in
mhm,
person and online, will join us on any given
mhm,
weekend. So yeah, and probably I would say 60 now. It's about 60 to 70% Not even 70, probably 60 to 65% white.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's become increasingly multi-ethnic
Yes.
as the years have gone, and as Edmonton continues to change and more people immigrate and move here. Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
So being a lead pastor of a church like that, it's a whole different animal.
Yeah.
It's not like the
Yeah.
churches that most of us have experienced and are normal, where it's a couple hundred people or maybe a
Mhm.
thousand at most, but you have a handful or a dozen of staff and volunteers that you work with to pull off
Mhm.
the Sunday program and the or Sunday worship, weekend worship, and some ministries during the week. But
Yeah.
you mentioned a staff of 60. How in the world do you get your head around that?
Yeah, well, there's that sense of, I mean, it's not a flat organization, or it's not just one
Okay.
layer. There's multiple
Mm,
layers. So when I think about leadership, to to be able to really care for 3 to 6 people, to manage 3 to 6 people, to
mm,
lead 3 to 6 volunteers, I think that's probably the extent to which we can do really well. There's a concept in ministry called a span of care, and how many people are you caring for, and the ratios around that,
mhm,
and how many small groups do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, but when you think about it, and this is from the military, I mean,
mm,
you can intimately know and be mindful and connected to about 3 to 6 people naturally, without trying
mhm,
hard, right? No one's going to fall through the cracks if it's 3 to 6. Like, that's,
mhm,
you can regularly pray and keep up with 3 to 6 people, and know that. And
mhm,
so, from a staffing perspective, I don't want anyone on our team having
mm,
more than 3 to 6 reports.
mhm,
So when I
mhm,
look at my team, I have 4 reports, and then they
mhm.
all have reports, and their reports have reports, et cetera,
Okay.
down the way. So
Good.
we're very much of a team of teams in that way.
Very good.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
the military doesn't get all the credit for that. Jesus
Yeah.
modeled
Yeah.
that with
That's right.
his
Yeah. The
3.
the one, the three, the 12. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So I want to give credit where
Yeah.
credit is
Right on.
ultimately
Right
due.
on. I like
Because
that.
I often refer back to Jesus when I'm in tough situations or new situations. I'm looking at the red letters of Jesus and gleaning wisdom from that because, um, well, life has gotten more complicated than ever
Yeah. No kidding.
during pandemic and post pandemic, and the diversity matters and the polarized politics. I'm not sure if it's different in Canada, but
Yeah.
it's a post Christian world
Yes.
up there, and then so you already, as a society, already deal with the matters of gay rights and
Yes. Yeah.
diversity quotas, and also mental health is a different thing, and
Hmm.
that's something that we've done here at the Erasing Shame podcast is really focus our conversation, um, moving it from just Asian American and where shame shows up in every aspect of life, and more towards, well, how do we encourage Christian Asian mental health? And some Asians go to Asian churches, some go to non-Asian churches,
Hmm.
and yet we have this lived experience of being on the margins because of what we look like. And for many of us, with the immigrant family story
Yeah.
and identity journeys and all kinds of other things like that. And so, in a church like yours, how have you noticed the mental health issues arise, and how do you try to serve and address it?
Yeah. I mean, you're completely right. It's everywhere. And when we think about how do we as followers of Christ address the fact that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, but we live in
Hmm.
a fallen world, right? Like,
Hmm.
how do we navigate that tension? And that's a paradigm that I learned from a Christian psychiatrist in our city, where he helped me recognize, yeah, that's one of those tensions that we have to hold. That, yes, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Yes, this is who Jesus is. Yes, he has made us in his image. God has made us in his image. We are formed and we're continually shaped into the likeness of Christ, yet we live in a fallen world. So
Mhm.
what does it mean to live in a fallen world? What are the consequences of living in a fallen world? Well,
Mhm.
there's the environmental consequences of pollution, but there's also
Yes.
the mental consequences. And in psychology, there's a framework of biopsychosocial, and then you add
Yes.
the spiritual onto that, right? So we're
Mhm.
biopsychosocial, spiritual human beings. So to
Yes.
say that any and this would be very typical in Asian contexts, right? If there's something wrong, it's a spirit in Asian Christian context. If there's something
Mhm.
wrong, it's always a spiritual issue,
Mm.
right? So are you
Mhm.
depressed? Well, that's a spiritual issue with a spiritual solution. Are you
Mm. Mm.
suicidal? It's a spiritual issue with a spiritual solution,
Mm.
right? Are you et cetera,
Mm.
et cetera? You know, you go down the list, and it just seems in Asian context in particular, and it's not just exclusive to Asian context, but I found in a
Mhm.
lot of Asian Christian contexts, it is like
Mhm.
it's always thought of as being spiritual. And it's like, yes, there
Mhm.
is. We Ephesians 6, we live in a spiritual world. This battle is not against
Yes.
flesh and blood, but against
Yes.
spiritual forces, principalities, powers all around us. But we also live in a fallen world. So God created our minds. Just think about cancer, for example. There's a
Mm.
mutation. Is that a spiritual issue, or is that just a result of what we eat and what's in this world and the fallen world, right? I mean, and you think
Mhm.
about it, right? It's like you have someone who has a heart disease, right? And
Mhm.
you're like, okay, is that their issue? Is that a spiritual issue? No, there's genetics that has to
Mhm.
play in all of that too, right? And why
Mhm.
does genetics have anything to do with that? Because we live in a fallen world and we're
Yes.
continually reaping those consequences. So, from a theological standpoint, understanding that paradigm that we are fearfully and wonderfully made and live in a fallen world is so foundational to addressing anything related to mental health. Now, as a church, I was really heartbroken over the increasing rate of suicide,
Mm.
um, especially during I mean, it's been around for a while, right? But during the
Mhm.
pandemic, the
Yes.
the 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 increasing rate of suicide and drug overdoses, and
Oh,
the opioid epidemic that's going on, like
yes.
all of these issues. So as a
Mhm.
church, we did a series. It was a long series. It was called Asking for a Friend. And
Mm.
as a team, we discerned, okay, what are the questions that we might be ashamed of asking ourselves? But,
Mhm.
if I'm asking for a friend, then it's not really me. I mean, it is you, but it's not really me. I'm asking for a friend. So we talked about a lot of different issues: food, anger, um, getting high was one of them. Suicide. We addressed suicide, another one. I remember getting an email from someone saying, "I can't believe you're talking about suicide. I can't believe like this is not of God. Like, what are you talking about?" And I'm like, no, come to the weekend, because I mean, there's suicide all throughout the script. God doesn't want it,
Mhm.
right? But you look at the Garden of Eden. What did the enemy tempt Adam and Eve with? Eat this apple and you will surely not die. Yeah, they didn't physically die, but in so many
Mhm.
aspects they died. In so many aspects they died by suicide. Not physically,
Mm.
but in a lot of other aspects they did. When
Mhm.
Jesus was when he was getting the temptations, when he was facing the temptations in the desert from the enemy, Satan brought him to the top of the right to the top of the temple and said, "Throw yourself down." Like, what is that? Throw
Oh,
yourself
wow.
down? That's
Mm.
suicide,
Mm.
right? I mean,
Mm.
time and time again, Elijah, and you just go all throughout the scriptures. You're like, wow, the enemy really wants people made in God's image to kill themselves, because he keeps on pulling out the same trick over and over and over again. So now how do you address that? Well, it's not only a spiritual issue, right? There's a lot in and around that. So yeah, from a weekend perspective, from a church perspective, we address it in that way. And as a pastor, and this is specifically, and we can put the link to that message if you want here, and
Oh,
and
for
and
sure. I will
yeah, we
add
can
that
share
in the
that.
show notes. So
Yeah,
thank you for
because
mentioning.
Yeah, because what I did with the getting high and the suicide one
Mm-hmm.
was, I'm a pastor, I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. So when I preached those messages, I did a lot of research and I actually consulted a Christian psychiatrist and other counselors and psychologists, and were able to incorporate them into the message, what they said into it, so that it's like, hey, from
Oh.
a
Mm-hmm.
psychiatrist standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
we got to understand something here. And then it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, why is Daniel talking about that? Like, shouldn't he be preaching the Bible? And it's like, yeah, well, I did preach from the Bible, but I got the psychiatrist to do the other thing. So we addressed it from that perspective. So that was the most recent thing we did. But Celebrate Recovery is a huge part of our ministry here up in Canada. We're one of the hubs for Saddleback, like for the Celebrate Recovery. I don't know if they call it network or not, but the lead, our lead
Mm-hmm.
volunteer here resources all the Northern Alberta
Mm-hmm.
churches in that.
That's great.
Mhm.
And for listeners that are new to Celebrate Recovery, it's a uh, Christian-based recovery program addressing addictions, habits, hurts, and hangups,
Yes,
which includes mental health
that's right.
and any other issues that we deal with that keep us from living a abundant life. So that's tremendous. You address it on Sunday, you provide a support group, and that those are kind of two lifelines that we want to encourage churches to uh, be open to how the Spirit is leading, because those are the two very things that the psychiatrists and the psychologists cannot address. I was just at a mental health summit in Utah last week
Yeah,
with 100 organizations looking to figure out how to stop stigma about mental health in America.
yeah,
And while they talk about the biopsychosocial model of how to help a human person live well and become healthy, the social aspect is very much neglected,
yeah,
even though it's in that chart.
yeah, yeah,
And uh, in my own lived experience of 20 years plus managed my own mental illness, it's really the church can be that safe place to really
mhm,
support the social and spiritual pieces of that diagram, which in many ways are more affordable and accessible and powerful than any therapy or um, psych therapy or medicine can do alone. Because
yes, for sure.
even those things basically stabilize you and help you learn some
Yeah,
skills, but you need a safe place to really practice that
yes,
and
that's right.
incorporate into all your life. And then you having been part of Lifeway, they've done research about church and mental health, and
Hmm.
more than half of churches, not just Asian ones, but non-Asian ones across the board, more than half of churches think that our mental struggles are just spiritual, and
Hmm.
they're not.
Yeah, yeah,
We're one being.
yeah,
There's no
exactly.
part that cuts off mental from spiritual, from psychological and physical. And it's
Yeah,
so good that we're in a time where we can connect with each other online
yeah,
as well as in person and really become more whole and healthy people.
yeah,
And so
that's right.
thank you for being a part of that in Edmonton. I happened to be in Edmonton in the winter of 2018
Oh, really?
at
Oh,
a
it's before yeah, before I came back.
yes, and it was the week between Christmas and New Year, so some of the Chinese churches in the area were having their winter retreat. My friend was a speaker, and it was
Okay.
minus 40 up there. Very, very cold. And I happened to look up at the temperature in the North Pole. It was minus 40 up there. So I was like,
Yeah.
wow, Edmonton is as cold as the North Pole.
Not all the time. Not all the time.
But I was there when it was. It was pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And Edmonton has this amazing tunnel system so that people can get around
Yeah.
during the winter time when it is crazy cold like that. So,
Yeah. And we used to have North America's biggest mall. So
yeah,
yeah.
well, you still have that for Canada then.
Yeah, for Canada, I think. I
Okay,
think
well, there you go.
Mall of America,
Yes,
who
yes, yes.
the same owners that built West Edmonton Mall, built Mall of America. So it's pretty fun.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, biggest in the U.S., biggest in Canada.
Yeah.
He likes to be big.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been rich It's been helpful, and I'm glad you're staying healthy and productive and enjoying life. And one last note that I'm starting to pick up is how pastors and their wives are really pairing up to do ministry in a healthy way. The teaching part as well as the therapy part.
Yeah.
And it used to be pre-COVID that, man, these young pastors are just full throttle. They wanted to get their MDiv and MBA.
Yeah.
And they wanted to be uber productive. But now I think post-COVID perhaps has given us a better perspective that we need to be healthy on both sides of our brain, both sides of our being, that we need to be emotionally healthy, mentally healthy, as well as theologically grounded and spiritually strong. So that's a hopeful vision for us.
Yes, for sure. And I forgot to say actually that for about a year, about a year now, I've been going to counseling. So I forgot to mention that. It's one of those things that I'm open about with the congregation, because I want to help normalize. I want to help normalize that it's okay. That I actually think everyone should go to counseling. So I go to counseling. I see my counselor every month, and for all the past, and this I think this is good for everyone.
Yes.
And you don't necessarily need to go to counseling forever, but we all have stuff that we haven't dealt with properly. Little T traumas, big T traumas, and different things as well that we do need to deal with. But as a pastor, here's why I think pastors especially need to go to counseling.
Okay.
Because pastors are in a place where they're so much on the giving end of listening, of counseling, of caring for others, and it's continual output. And the big question for pastors is there a safe space? Is there somewhere where I can be, I can share my thoughts behind my thoughts, where I can wrestle things down? And there's peer groups, which are important. I'm in peer groups. There's cohorts you can be a part of, which are very important as well when you're with peers as well. But to be in a relationship where you're actually paying the person to completely be about you, right?
Yes.
And there's this professional relationship where they are bound by their covenant and their oath in their industry to not share anything you're talking about with anyone else. And to be in that therapeutic relationship I find it so beneficial, because it allows me to be fully known. We have to have those relationships everywhere. And sometimes it's like, I need to share this with someone. I can't share it with someone right now, but I can share it with my counselor right now, and they can help me work it out, and then it can go more into the light. So that's why I think it's so important. And I feel like there's such a stigma among church members. There's such a stigma among pastors as well, and even more so in the Asian community, and being like, it's a sign of weakness. And it's not. It's actually intentionality, and it helps you move toward health. So,
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That is so powerful, because leading by example and showing us the path to health will be good for your health and be good for those that will heed that counsel as well. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks,
Daniel.
DJ.
Great connecting with you. Look forward to seeing you in person one day again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Erase and Shame podcast. Check out our website at eraseandshame.com. We would love to hear your comments and questions. Please subscribe on any podcast app like Apple, Google, Spotify, or on Facebook and YouTube. And please add a rating, a review, and a share so more people can experience the freedom and healing that comes from erasing shame.